EMDR Chat with Curt and Michelle. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Curtis Roundson.
And I am Dr. Michelle Gottlieb. We've been thinking a lot about what we want to do on this podcast. There has been a lot, well, not about a lot, but there's been some conversation lately in the larger world of clinicians talking about the efficacy of EMDR therapy. Is it really a thing? And we really wanted to talk to you all about it because, first off, this used to be a huge conversation back when Dr. Shapiro started EMDR therapy.
Yeah.
And now it's come up again. And we just want to make sure you guys have really good information to make good choices. So, Curt, did you want to start maybe with some of the history? We can start for that.
Of course. When Francine began what was then EMD, one of the things that made it such a target for other therapies and other therapeutic approaches was that it got quick results in a population where pretty much they had been written off as having to suffer their entire life, and that was people suffering from post-traumatic stress. The results in other kinds of therapy were very dismal. Today we know that part of the reason is that trauma is not processed completely by words. It's on other nonverbal and physiological states that have to be processed, which EMDR does. EMDR is not a talk therapy. But I find it interesting that there's been a renewed targeting of EMDR about its effectiveness today, and often quoting articles that were written 25 years ago and have already been since disproven. So there hasn't been a lot of really good, checking out of the research in some of these articles. But EMDR has proven to be very effective. Over 40 randomized controlled studies. And
which is, if you do not know, that is the gold standard. Random controlled studies are the gold standard. We have over 40 that say EMDR therapy is an effective psychotherapy.
And, part of what we also are running across in our work, Michelle and I, is people that have been said they've had EMDR therapy and it didn't work, or it caused them to get worse. But when we inquire about what really happened in the session, what we discover is that, number one, either the person doing it said they were doing EMDR therapy, and they were not, like putting headphones on and just talking to someone, or they demonstrate an absolute lack of training in the basic protocol of EMDR therapy. And Michelle and I, we laugh about this all the time, that people who become the best EMDR therapist out there were people who were good therapists before they got EMDR trained. So that also is a factor.
Now, let's talk about the studies a little bit more. You mentioned the 40 RCTs. There's something that also that's, I want to say the last 5 years, Curt, you may have better years than I have about that, is one of the things, because one of the arguments historically and more recently about EMDR therapy is that the bilateral stimulation, whether, again, it's auditory or visual or tactile, that's not really necessary. That's just kind of an added bell and whistle, and that there's nothing new about EMDR therapy. Well, they've done component analysis on the bilaterals, and we have found that they are incredibly necessary to make EMDR therapy as effective as it is. And I think that's a really important piece that people need to be aware of. We actually have studied this, and we have the evidence.
And Michelle, what's really interesting is that those comments were also made 25 years ago.
Right.
And people studied, either EMDR without eye movements or with eye movements. And what was interesting is that in the actual studies, the study itself showed that those that had eye movements had better relief from their symptoms. However, when that study was summarized and reviewed by an outside reviewer, their conclusion was the eye movement was not helpful. And yet in the study itself, as you look at the study, it was very clearly that eye movement group were sufficiently improved. And I just think it's interesting. And the other thing is that, EMDR is exposure therapy, and we are not an exposure therapy. We goes about it completely different than prolonged exposure. And one of the things EMDR does is actually restructures the traumatic memory itself. It doesn't just create a competing memory to extinguish a response. It really does restructure and reintegrate the memory in a different format.
As long as we're talking about research that may not have shown what the researcher wanted to show, Curt, you got to talk about the Prozac study.
Oh, my goodness, yeah. For any of you who are aware of this, you're going to get this. You probably have not read it in any journal because I don't believe it ever got published. But Bessel van der Kolk, one of the leading international research psychiatrists, several years ago did a study comparing EMDR to Prozac. It's really interesting because, Prozac was one of the very first medications used to treat PTSD because they believed it was associated with low serotonin. And so Prozac is still often common given to PTSD. Ironically, it is shown to be a little less effective for veterans that have been in war or those that have been child onset abuse. It works best with adult onset trauma, I should say. Well, what van der Kolk did, he took a group of people, and I can't remember the exact number, but he had EMDR group and a Prozac group. Oh, there was 88 subjects. 30 received EMDR therapy and 28 Prozac, and the rest had a placebo, a sugar pill. And what they found was the group on Prozac did slightly better than the placebo group, but barely so. And this was typical of most studies for drugs with PTSD. Simply showing up brings an additional 5 to 15%, simply showing up. However, the patients on EMDR did substantially better than those either on Prozac or placebo. And after 8 EMDR sessions, 1 in 4 were completely cured. That is, they did not meet PTSD symptomology anymore. And when interviewed, the EMDR subjects, 60% of those who received EMDR scored as completely before 8 months later. That was really, in contrast, all those who had Prozac relapsed when they went off the drug. And what was really important, it demonstrated for the first time that a focused trauma-specific therapy for PTSD like EMDR could be much more effective than medication. And I find that he talks about that in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. And that's a very significant study, and we don't hear much about it.
And Curt, why is that perhaps we don't hear too much about that?
I think part of it might have had to do with the fact, I may be incorrect, but I think part of it was funded by Eli Lilly that makes Prozac. And I don't know if that's behind it or that's just my speculation, but I find it interesting that we don't find much information about it except when van der Kolk talks about it in his book.
So that's some of the research that we wanted to put out there. And there's more research coming in, goodness, every day. If you go to emdria.org, EMDRIA.org, it has lists and lists of phenomenal research going on. So that's the first thing that we wanted to say. There's a ton of research, and it's good research. Which, let me say this quickly, there is a difference between good research and not so good research. Curt alluded to that one study that showed BLS was effective, and yet when they did the write-up, it didn't say that. So it's important when you read a study, you don't just read the abstract, and you don't just read the last paragraph. You actually look at what's being done and said, because you may find out whether it's a good study or not a good study. So there's that piece.
And I'll add one other caveat there, too, is that most of us, as I probably said before on this podcast, we quit reading research when we left graduate school. And so we rely upon other people who review research to tell us what the research means. And I mentioned the fact that almost 21 years ago now, Byron Perkins and I wrote an article going through all the literature on EMDR at that time, 2002 was published. And we went through what the research actually said. And we went through what the reviewers of the research said it said. And we defined the differences under 3 categories, what we call the sins of omission, commission, and distortion. And it's you can still find it in print in the Journal of Clinical Psychology. And that was now 21 years ago. And these same things creep up every once in a while. Another one, Michelle, creeps up, I just want to throw out, is that EMDR is nothing but hypnosis.
Right? I have clients ask me that on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's just like, it's not hypnosis. I mean, EEG studies have shown that in hypnotic trance, there tends to be movement in brain waves into an alpha state, which is a relaxed state. But in EMDR therapy, it's a completely alert state, beta state, which looks like those on a EEG beta waves are like a sawtooth, like saw.
Mm-hmm,
And ironically, when we were in REM sleep, the REM sleeps look very much like beta waves. It's very interesting. I wonder if it has something to do with dreams and rapid eye movements. Who would have thought of that?
I know. Isn't that interesting? And what's interesting about that as well is, again, if you're in hypnotic trance, you are listening more and being told what to do. In EMDR therapy, I don't talk much and I listen more to my client. They're telling me stuff. So again, who is in charge in hypnotic trance versus EMDR therapy is an important thing to look at as well.
Right.
And I do tell my clients that I'd love to make them bark like a dog, but that's not what happens.
No, not at all.
No. So, Curt, the other thing that you and I were talking about earlier was, because people have talked about there's no real theory here.
All it is theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one knows how EMDR works. It's just theory. I love that comment. It speaks to some misunderstanding of research, I'm afraid, because everything we do is theory. Behavioral theory, learning theory, psychoanalytic theory, etc., etc., etc. Everything's a theory. In science, everything is theory. That's a speculation of why something might work. And when something is proven, it's called a law. That's why we have the law of gravity, Michelle, and the theory of relativity, right? So what we do know in EMDR therapy, and perhaps this is true of all therapies that are effective in the treating of trauma over time, is that you see the shifts in brain function pre and post treatment. And pre and post treatment for EMDR shows a shift of brain activity and freeing up and allowing other aspects of your brain to work more, because in the midst of trauma, there's a closing down of parts of the brains and a firing up of other parts of the brain. And this is what we see shifting. Now, other approaches that help may show that same shift, but we do know EMDR does it because they've done SPECT scans. Vanderkolk done SPECT scans. Amen has done, Vanderkolk did PET scans. Amen does SPECT scans. And you see the changes in the brain. So why does the brain change? Well, that's theory. And when Vanderkolk published the Prozac study, he was asked, how does EMDR work? And his comment was, he said, hell, we don't know why Prozac works. It's all theory. Right. Yeah.
And actually, let me kind of go way back. And Curt, I'm going to guess you're going to have something to say about this as well. Early on, when it was still EMD, we had not yet gotten the R. There was not AIP, adaptive information processing. We didn't have the theory that supported why we were doing what we were doing. Francine hadn't gotten to that yet. And then that was a complaint people had, is it was merely like technology, but it really wasn't a therapy. But as Francine continued on with her work and she developed AIP, now we have a theory that supports EMDR therapy that is continuing to evolve based on all of this research and all this education and learning that we all have.
Oh, yeah. In the early days, Francine was, accused of just having a gimmick and, wanting to market a gimmick. And basically, or they said it was exposure and there's only exposure and eye movements mean nothing. And today we know that's simply not true. And Francine had stumbled upon a methodology that she had to explain. And that's where the adaptive information processing model emerged in her attempt to explain why the eye movements had an effect. And, European studies do show that eye movement very rapidly diminish the vividness of visual memory. They've shown that in the lab.
What I love is that, again, as we always say, it's an innate mechanism in the brain. She didn't invent this, she just discovered it. But that the cultures worldwide historically have used bilaterals like drumming, things like that have been very therapeutic. This is just, the West calls things different things.
Yeah.
But
and you'll find Van der Kolk talking about that in The Body Keeps the Score, about communal healing processes and dancing and things like that are specific to certain cultures. It was sort of a community way of dealing with trauma.
Yeah, and Gabor Mate, the same thing.
Yes.
He talks about it as well.
Yes.
We don't have a ton of time left, so I did want to say a couple of other things for those people who are still wondering if there's anything there. There are many, many, many organizations, governmental agencies that recommend EMDR therapy. And when I go through some of the stuff, you'll know that I want you to hear the names I'm saying, that these are not people who just for the fun of it decided to join in, that they really look at research and they really want to make sure that that people are doing the right things for clients. Let's start with the World Health Organization. In fact, the World Health Organization said, 7-8 years ago now, because we used to just say EMDR, and they're like, you are a therapy. You are a complete and total therapy. Refer to yourself as a therapy. World Health Organization wants EMDR therapy done everywhere there's a trauma. So World Health Organization absolutely sees EMDR therapy as positive. SAMHSA, which is the alcohol governmental agency, they see EMDR therapy as valuable. The VA, there's politics there, of course, but the VA recommends EMDR therapy. ISSTS, which is the International Society for the Trauma of...
It was a study of dissociation and trauma.
Oh, that's ISSTDS.
Oh, that's right. International
This is
Society for Traumatic Stress Studies.
That one. Yep. That one. APA, both the American Psychological Association and the American Psychiatric Association, both APAs, recommend it. The Australian guidelines for PTSD have it. The Israeli guidelines have it. Let's see, have I missed any? United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees suggests it. What were you going to say?
The National Institute of Clinical Excellence, which is a European organization.
The Cochrane database. And if you know anything about the Cochrane studies, they before they add anything, they do a deep dive into whether it's going to work or not. So again, more and more and more organizations, states, countries are recommending EMDR therapy because it works.
Well, and frankly, we've gotten EMDR therapy has gotten a lot of social publicity. Thank you. Recently, because of some high-profile people that have come out and credited EMDR therapy with their improvement, them staying sober, them dealing with traumas, and from actors to royalty, and you could go through a whole list. And I find it fascinating that this is happening now. It usually takes 100 years for a theory to come into prominence. It's analytic theory took almost 100 years. But Francine Shapiro was able to take it from a technique into a theory and showed studies that showed it effective in her lifetime. And that is simply an amazing feat.
And so, building on what Curt just said, clients are hearing about EMDR therapy everywhere, all over social media, right? It's everywhere now. And people are going to come in and asking you to do EMDR therapy with them. We said in an earlier podcast, we talked about how to find a good training company. So please get trained by a good training company. If you are already trained, wonderful, thank you. Get certified. Find a good consultant. If you're already certified, you're on the process somewhere, take advanced trainings. There's so much more for us to learn. And whether that's dissociation or addictions or working with kids, whatever, keep learning. There's so much more healing we all need to do.
I learn something every week.
Seriously.
So it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us and listening in. By the way, if you ever have any topics you want us to talk about, please let us know that. We really appreciate all that you do and all the healing you do.
And you can contact us through emdrprofessionaltraining.com.
Thank you.